Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. It's high time the WBA clarified whether Robert Helenius is the mandatory challenger to Anthony Joshua or one of its other champions. Helenius won an eliminator in March, stopping Adam Kownacki in New York in 5 rounds in what was an upset performance. After the fight, he was given a medal by the WBA, and you can see that here on screen. And the broadcast commentators declared him the mandatory challenger to Anthony Joshua. Except the WBA never said that at the time and hasn't said that since. It's actually been radio silence on what winning that eliminator sets Helenius up for, remembering that there's also a regular champion as well as an interim champion currently. In its most recent rankings update, the WBA elevated Helenius above the rankings and it made him its gold champion, which is actually a relatively new belt. The previous holder was Joe Joyce. He won that a year or so ago against Berman Stavern, more recently dropping it, and that allowed Helenius to be elevated to gold champion. And it is debatable about how much stock we can put in that gold strap. But having won that eliminator is going to mean something. But what is that something? And what's got me thinking about this is an article that I was forwarded on Twitter. It's from Finnish media, and in my view, it actually casts some doubt over whether Helenius is the mandatory to Anthony Joshua, which, let's face it, that's not exactly a fight many are calling for, not one that the division really needs, although I'm sure Helenius would beg to differ. So there is a couple of interesting quotes that I want to get to, and I've got a few thoughts about. So Marcus Sundman, who was Helenius' manager, told HS, a Finnish outlet, with the victory, Helenius became the gold champion of the WBA. Before the WBA's new quotation, Helenius also became the 6th challenger of the IBF, but Helenius is not at all on the recent IBF list. It's hard to tell why this is the case, but Robert is a mandatory in the WBA. It may be the IBF sees that Robert has the next match for the WBA title. The only thing here is that we are going after Joshua. I think we only have one match in between, and of course we have to win it. And then the outlet details Helenius' goal is to fight next summer, so in the next few months if he can, and Sundman says, there have been contacts with promoters, but there are no direct negotiations because there is nothing about any schedule. Okay, first off, just regarding Helenius being dropped from the IBF rankings, he had been in 6th position. That's an easy one to cover off. With the WBA recognising him as a champion, that means the other sanctioning bodies will do so as well, so they've pulled him from their rankings. The same happened with Dillian Whyte when he took the WBC interim title, although I constantly see people who say it's disgraceful that Whyte's not ranked, although he cannot be ranked. Simply put, he is above the rankings, he cannot be in them. Anyway, one of the statements that really grabbed my attention from Marcus Sundman was the ambiguous quote about Helenius being a mandatory in the WBA. Surely it would have been easier to say that Helenius is the confirmed mandatory challenger to Joshua, but that wasn't said. Also, Sundman said, we're going after Joshua. And he could have easily said something like, Joshua can't avoid us now. And let's be real, language matters. And I don't think this is a case of, lost in translation. He didn't say Joshua's got no opportunity to avoid Helenius, just they're going after him and that Helenius is a mandatory in the WBA. And this is why the WBA needs to clarify the situation. Is Helenius the mandatory to Joshua or not? Because just being a mandatory could mean that he gets pulled into that whole rabbit hole of having to fight one of the other belt holders. As it is, the regular champion Manuel Char and interim champion Trevor Bryan, they were meant to square off, but that's been delayed to the current cancellation of all boxing. But it is totally conceivable, in my view, that the WBA could order Helenius to face the winner of that eventual fight. So while Helenius' manager might be pushing for a Joshua fight, ultimately it may not be the one that he gets. And it's worth throwing in some context here. The WBA awarded eliminator status for that Helenius vs Kownacki fight, but it didn't say ahead of it that the winner was going to get Joshua, nor has it said that post Helenius winning that fight. Also, Helenius was only parachuted into the WBA rankings a couple of months ahead of that fight for that fight. So he comes from nowhere to be number 6 and then scores an upset win. So to then award him a Joshua fight on the strength of that probably wouldn't sit well with most fans, remembering he was iced by Gerald Washington less than a year ago, then had one journeyman level win at the end of 2019 before facing Kownacki March the 7th. And Kownacki, he was the one that was expected to win. He'd built up a decent run of wins before getting stopped by Helenius. And had he won, maybe the WBA would have been more forthright and gone as far as making statements about his position, in relation to the mandatory status for Joshua. But they haven't. So you got the slightly awkward situation of Helenius winning that fight, but what do they do with him? The fact that there's been no pronouncement by the WBA publicly, it's telling, I believe it is, and it must be a concern to the Helenius camp, surely. The only thing that the WBA has said that I can see and find publicly is it gave him an honourable mention for March on its website. No mention of him being the mandatory to Joshua, and if that was truly locked in, wouldn't that have been smeared all over the WBA website, all over boxing coverage immediately after the fight? As it was, we only had the broadcasters saying that, but not really anyone else as far as I can see. But also, the other thing that got me questioning Helenius being Joshua's mandatory is the statement saying, I think we only have one match in between, and of course we have to win it. There have been contacts with promoters, but there are no direct negotiations because there is nothing about any schedule. And some of that to me, on the surface, it may not sound out of place, but consider this. Helenius is at the back end of his career. He's never made the staggering sums of money that a Joshua fight will provide him. And if you knew that was going to be your first and only title shot, most likely, surely you'd be talking and thinking a little different to what Sunmund is saying. You'd want to protect that mandatory shot, get Helenius paid, and you'd probably look to do what Kubrat Pulev has been doing, tick over with lower level opposition with the sole purpose of making it to that Joshua fight. Some fighters might decide just to wait it out, knowing that their shot will eventually come because they've earned it. I don't know if Helenius has earned it, and the WBA hasn't said anything to sort of say that he's got it. And just some of what Helenius' manager is saying, also to me at least, sounds like the Joshua fight is the one that they want, that they're working towards, but it doesn't sound like it's a lock by any stretch either. And I don't think something got lost in translation either. And perhaps what we are seeing is Helenius is closer than many others in the division to a title shot, courtesy of that win over Kownacki. So that might end up being parlayed into a confirmed payday with another contender, say a rematch with Kownacki, or fight someone else, for the highest money available. Having won that eliminator and now having the gold title is a bargaining chip to get a better payday, but maybe not necessarily a guaranteed title shot. But some promoters will no doubt be willing to pay a premium for Helenius as a result of that recent win, knowing it could get their fighter closer to a title shot. But hey, it's the WBA, they do all sorts of weird stuff. Who knows where this could go? I'm not convinced he's the mandatory to Joshua, but what do you make of it? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.